Hi again, everybody. Right, here we go. We have a nice big audience for this session, so it takes a while to, get all to calm down and settle down. So, moving right along, we're keeping on schedule this afternoon. We just had an amazing session with two novelists. We're going into another amazing session with two novelists. You're getting a full dose of first-class fiction this afternoon. I'm going to hand over in a moment to the host of this session, Hadassah Williams, next to me. Hadassah, as most of the Trinis in the audience will know, is a Trinidadian writer, one of our most exciting emerging writers, working away on, we think, her first novel, which we're expecting to read one of these years, very excited about. And she's going to be in conversation with the two other authors here this afternoon, who are in the middle, Ayanna Lloyd Banwo. Ayanna, of course, everybody knows Ayanna, Trinidadian. She's been away from us for a couple of years. She left, she published a book, she came back. I think she needs a big round of applause to welcome her back home. We are so happy to have her back. She's one of our favorite festival people. I shouldn't say that out loud because all the other writers are going to be like, well, who is me? But Ayanna is a special friend of Boca's, so we're very happy to have her back here, and equally happy to have someone completely new to the festival. I don't think this is the first year, as far as I know, that we've ever had at Boca's we've had any writers from Belfast. And as some of you may know, thanks to the British Council, we've got a whole program of events this year that feature a delegation of writers and literary organizers from Belfast, kind of building links between Belfast, Port of Spain literature that's in some ways very different to ours and in some ways not so different. So we're very happy to have Carson here with us this afternoon. So please give her a first-time enormous welcome. Sometimes when we have to put these events together and pair the writers off, there's some writers you think, God, what are we going to do with this person? This book is. And then in this case, these are two completely different books that have so many interesting parallels. I had read Ayanna's first, I read Jan's book, and I thought, well, there's not even a question which two are going to be paired together, and you're going to find out why. So please, let's get this started. Let's welcome them, and let's hear some amazing words from our writers on stage.
Okay, so thank you so much for that warm introduction, Nicholas. So really excited to have you both here in conversation for this Take Two event. And of course, we'd like to open the floor with a reading, but first we have to get through the formalities of introductions and bios and all those things. So, Ayanna, I'd like to start with you. Ayanna being the author of the highly acclaimed When We Were Birds, published by Hamish Hamilton in 2022. It was named as one of the best debut novels for 2022 by the UK Observer, longlisted for this year's Authors Club Best First Novel Award, and I think is also currently shortlisted for the Jalak Prize. Yes, great. And shortlisted for Authors Club too, right? Props whether, yes, right? She holds a PhD from the University of East Anglia and is one of the winners of the Eccles Center and Hay Festival Writers Award. Her work can be found in so many Caribbean journals such as Moko Magazine, Small Axe, Pre, Callaloo, Wasafiri, and of course, When We Were Birds is the winner of the 2023 OCM Booker's Prize for Fiction. And shortlisted for the overall prize. It is a pleasure to welcome you home. Ladies and gentlemen, Ayanna Lloyd Banwo. So, would you like to open with a reading for us today?
Hello, this is amazing. It's amazing to be home. I had that stereotypical moment, when the plane, when you can finally actually see the hills, and I was like, Lord, I outside too long, boy. I outside too long. I want to read from the opening of the novel because, for me, Port of Spain is a city of a million stories. And I want to start with the opening of the novel, which is a story told to a very young Yejide by her grandmother. And she's telling her a story that is a story, but it's not a story, about how death came into the world. Yejide. First thing you have to remember Granny Catherine hold her granddaughter Ejide close on her lap, is that there was a time before time. She pressed the first layer of tobacco down into her ebony pipe. The flame from her silver lighter make a small blaze in the cavern of the bowl, and the pipe settled between her lips. Before we come to live in this house, before the settlement in the valley, before the quarries, when the forest was so thick that no man could cross it, Montmarie was the home only of animals. But not like the animals we see now, oh no. Catherine opened her eyes wide, and the blue smoke curled out of her nostrils. The ocelots was big like tigers. The deer run so fast that no man could catch them, even if he dare enter the forest to hunt them. And the little green parrots that sing at dusk was as big as the blood-red ibis that live in the swamplands. The animals could talk to each other, yes, just like I talking to you now. And they built a mighty city in the forest. But the city was nothing like Port Angeles. It had no buildings, no boundaries, no gates, and the animals lived together without territory to guard and borders to mind. But one day, a warrior wandered into the forest. He see that it full of animals to hunt and fruit to eat. When he look at the trees, he only see the houses he could build. And when he look at the land, he only see what he could take. The animals tried to talk to him and tell him that there was so much more there than what he could see. But he did not know their language and so could not understand them. That warrior bring more warriors, and with the warriors come builders, and with the builders come farmers, and with the farmers come priests. With the priests come governors, and with the governors come death. But the animals fight them, right? Ejide squirmed on her granny lap. Nothing she loved more than this full cupboard feeling, the sweet smell of tobacco, the even rhythm of the rocking chair, the green hills, and her granny face brimming with story. She think of the sharp teeth of the ocelots and the tight grip of the mackerel that could suffocate a man in its coils. No way any human with just 2 legs, very small teeth, and no poison at all could ever defeat the wild animals of the forest. Catherine looked at her and puffed on her pipe. Who telling this story, you or me? Ejide grinned and quieted down again. The animals had always lived in peace, but they know then that it was time for war. The battle raged bloody and terrible. The quarry you see there? Catherine pointed out the window to the deep brown crater on the hillside, was where the animals make a stand in a battle so fierce that it leaves scars on the mountain. All that killing cut the forest deep. Wounded, it went into mourning, and that bring the longest dry season ever on Montmarie. The rivers hide in the earth, and the trees wilt and die away. The ocelots shrink small like house cats. The howler monkeys get timid, and the deer and manikou and lap who had lived in peace before start to look at each other and see food. The warriors suffer too, for no one, man nor animal, could survive when nature decided to withhold its bounty. Then one day, when all were weary, and it looked like the war would claim not only the fighters, but the whole forest, a great storm set up in the hills. Fat gray clouds empty out into the green, and the men and animals rejoice to see the rivers rise again, and the forest drink deep of the rain. Thunder and lightning pelted down for 3 days and 3 nights. But remember, I tell you, this was a time before time, when a tree could reach full grown in a day, and a boy could reach manhood in a night. So this storm was longer and fiercer than any of the animals had ever seen before. The earth slid down the hillsides and crashed into the valley below. Trees older than any animal could remember lose their hold on the earth and topple over. Rivers burst their banks and rush over the land. Rejoicing turn again to sorrow. It come like the whole forest turn on them and demand its share of the lives who defiled its sacred places with war. Now the green parrots, the ones who cackle and sing and chatter just like you, Catherine pinched Yejide's lips together to stop her from giggling. Well, they were wiser than any of the animals give them credit for. The parrots watched the rain and watched the hills and watched the rivers and watched the dead pile high. They gathered together in the branches of the last sacred silk cotton tree and hold a council. At the council's end, the parrot battalion split and divided in two. One half fly to the east, the other half fly to the west. The parrots that went west get small and become the little green birds that we see today, those that sing and fly towards the setting of the sun. But those that went east towards the sunrise mute their green feathers to black and curve their beaks into sharp hooks. Their bodies get fat and their wingspan stretch so wide they darken the land below them as they fly. They release one last great song that make all the animals and men tremble, then grow gray hoods around their necks and heads that silence their throats forever. You know what they turn into, Yejide? Catherine stare out the window, smile, and puff on her pipe. Kobo! Yejide cry out. She loved getting the right answer. No matter how many times she heard the story, knowing the answer always make her feel very grown up and very important. Catherine nodded and pulled deep from her pipe. When the change was complete, they feel their bellies get hungry for flesh. They spread their wings wide and circle the land slow, searching out the dead. And with their new long curved beaks and talons sharp like caiman teeth, they tear into the flesh of the animals who was once their friends and the men who was once their enemies. When they're done, they take to the silk cotton tree again, leaving nothing but bone.
Thank you so much, Ayanna, for that wonderful reading. And now I'd like to introduce Jan Carson. I believe this is your first time with us at BOCAS, so welcome. Jan Carson is a novelist, short story writer, and community arts facilitator from Belfast, Northern Ireland. She's the author of 3 novels, the latest being The Raptures, which we are very excited to discuss today, published by Doubleday in 2022. This book has been shortlisted for the Kerry Group Irish Novel of the Year Award and was also shortlisted for the 2022 Ann Post Irish Book Awards Novel of the Year. Her second novel, The Firestarters, also published by Doubleday, won the 2019 EU Prize for Literature for Ireland and the 2020 Kitschy's Prize, hope I pronounced that right, for speculative fiction. She's also a short story writer, the author of 4 collections, and her work has also been translated into over a dozen languages. The Raptures has been described by the Irish Times as its own beautiful, unique thing, and I can tell you it is true. Jan Carson, I'd like to invite you to read a portion of The Raptures for us this afternoon.
Thank you. First of all, can I say a huge thank you for having me and having all of us Northern Irish people here for your beautiful festival. It is so nice to be somewhere it's not raining for 5 minutes.
You should have been here last week, it was raining.
Yeah. I hope I haven't jinxed that now. There'll maybe be a flood this afternoon. I'm going to give you a wee tiny bit of context to this. The Raptures is set in 1993 in a very small village in County Antrim in Northern Ireland. It focuses over a summer on a very small, very Protestant, very religious community where the children begin to get ill one by one and they die. Bit of a spoiler alert, they all die. My publisher keeps saying, can you tell people it's also quite funny or no one will buy it? A book about Presbyterian children dying during a pandemic is not an easy sell, so it's also quite funny. You're going to meet Hannah here, and Hannah is the 11-year-old narrator of this book. Hannah is the only child who doesn't die during this plague, and what happens to her is she's visited one by the ghosts of all of her school children or her school friends who have passed away. And Hannah's just trying to reconcile this with the very strict religion that she's been brought up with. I can say this here in Trinidad because it won't get back to my mother, but this is very much my journey. Hannah is very similar to me, and I hear from talking to people that a lot of you have had experiences with religion and charismatic religion and very conservative religion, and my book is literally falling apart as I write. So here goes. Hannah hears almost nothing of the sermon. She's preoccupied thinking about what's been said. Her thoughts are stuck in a frantic loop. It's only the flu, it's only the flu. But what if it's not? She can't stop thinking about Ross's face. In her head, it's all pink and hammy, covered in pus and blisters like Granda Pete's hand the time he burnt it on the barbecue. Her whole body's pulsing with anxiety. She doesn't realise she's fidgeting until Dad places a cautionary hand on her thigh and gives her a catch yourself on look. She tries to pray for the others, Kathleen, Lizzie and Mim. Her prayers won't catch. She light on a name, start to ask Jesus to make them better, then find she's thinking about herself. There's a pain in her belly. It's probably just hunger. Would you know yourself if you were really ill? She thinks about Ross. It's only a few days since he appeared to her. She wonders where he is now. His body's in the graveyard behind the Church of Ireland, but where's the other part of him? The new old Ross with the lonely eyes who couldn't tell her what was wrong. Is he still knocking about the village in some invisible way, or has he moved on to another place? Heaven, she hopes, for Hannah doesn't want anybody to go to hell, not even Jerry Adams, who's the wickedest person she knows. She hopes Ross is happier wherever he is. She's pretty sure he won't be coming back to see her. Nevertheless, she intends to keep using the downstairs loo for everything but baths. Hannah sees things differently now. Last week, there were two kinds of magic in her world. The holy magic God does with angels and miracles, and the other, bad magic, which they sometimes pray against. Witches, demons, ghosts and Satanists who'd sacrifice children if they got the chance. Other people think this kind of stuff is made up or harmless. In Hannah's church, they know the devil is real. They won't let their children dress up at Halloween for fear of giving Satan a foothold. They don't mess around with cures or fairy blessings or any of that sort of thing. Hannah's always understood and complied. No Halloween, no worst witch books, no reading the horoscopes at the back of Granda's paper, no raggedy tree. Doesn't matter how harmless it looked in Miss McEwen's photos, she wouldn't want to get close to it. She can't risk giving the devil a foothold. Since Ross appeared, she's been a bit confused. She assumes she's had an encounter with evil. An actual dead person came to see her. She's not quite ready to call Ross a ghost. Yet, it hadn't felt wrong in the moment. It was just like talking to an ordinary person, albeit a very quiet one. And Jesus had been there. He'd given Hannah the words to say. This makes no sense. No sense at all. For God can't stand evil. The Bible's pretty clear on this. Maybe everything's more complicated than she thought. What if Pastor Bill's not always right? Where does this leave her on all the other forbidden things? Dinosaurs, leprechauns, Paul Daniels' magic program, which she's not allowed to watch, but sometimes does secretly with Granda when Granny's not at home. The roof is peeling off Hannah's brain. This morning the church feels very small. The men in their dark suits glaring, the women in their funny hats, the old-fashioned hymns with old-fashioned words, so different from the music the ones in school like listening to. The praying and fasting, especially the fasting. It seems daft to think you can get God's attention just by skipping your Cocoa Pops. Hannah knows Pastor Bill would have a pink fit if she said any of this to him. If she marched up after the service and said, "Here, some people don't go straight to heaven after they die," he'd only quote Bible verses at her. He'd only tell her she was wrong. Mum's not in the mood for hanging around after church. "Home," she announces as soon as the benediction's been pronounced. She makes a beeline for the door. The men are standing about the vestibule talking as they usually do. This morning, there's no mention of the weather or last night's football. They're all speculating about the sick children. It'll just be a virus, says one old man. Aye, said another. There's glandular fever doing the rounds, and flu, adds a third. They say the wee McCormick lad would have been grand if he'd not had all that other stuff wrong with him. There must be 24 men congregated in the vestibule. Several of them have weans themselves or grandchildren about Hannah's age. They're all tripping over each other to convince themselves they've nothing to worry about. Mum puts her arms around Hannah's shoulder and steers her out to the car park so she won't tear. She's not quick enough. As Hannah's coming down the steps, she sees Mr. McMillan take her dad aside. You keep a tight eye on your wee lassie, John. If she so much as sneezes, straight up to casualty. Pastor Bill has had a word. We need to cover them weans in prayer.
Thank you, Jan, and I think both readings kind of encapsulates the full scope of what we would like to talk about today, so thank you for that. So on the surface, your book, Ayanna, When We Were Birds, seems to be preoccupied with the business of death, and yours, Jan, the Raptures, with the process of dying, and that's as basic as I guess it can get. And I think what my first question to you both will be, it's what was your entry point? And even though these are dark topics, I remember the quote that you mentioned in one of your interviews, Jan, about it will get better. And you do open the book with that line, it will eventually get better. So yes. So please tell us more about your entry points into your books. Probably you could start with you, Jan.
Yeah, I guess I so enjoyed the last session. I just thought three amazing women on stage full of humour and wisdom, and it felt just like being back in Ireland. And it was lovely to hear people talking about developing short stories into longer pieces of fiction. And for me, I always begin with character, and this book came from a series of short stories. This is very much the world that I grew up in, a very religious, separated world, which was set against the backdrop of the Troubles. I was born in 1980, so my family very much removed themselves from that and didn't get involved in politics or any of the violence. It was seen as a dirty business. And I wanted to write about that because that wasn't a unique experience in Northern Ireland. There were tens of thousands of young people like me who also had that experience growing up, and yet we were told, the community I'm from is very wary of the arts. The arts are seen as worldly, and so there wasn't a big encouragement to write about or to express those experiences. And I didn't want any more young people to grow up not seeing their experiences in books, in movies, in theatre. So I began to write short stories about the kind of people that I knew growing up. And short stories have a wily way sometimes of sort of tapping you on the shoulder and saying, we want a bit more space, we're actually a novel. So that's where they came from.
It's so funny that you say that, because I think that was also my experience with this novel. I was trying to, my family had a period where, we had deaths one by one for a few years, and we were very not used to people dying in a lot of ways. We were unfamiliar, it was like, ooh, hold on, what? We didn't know what to do, we didn't know what next. So it meant that for quite a while, I was kind of, the whole family really, trying to figure out what do we do? How do we bury? How do we mourn? How do we do a wake? Who remembers how to have a wake? What are we supposed to do? We're supposed to light candles, right? Anybody had candles? When last current went? So it was that kind of odd, surreal process of something that is supposed to be very, very familiar that we just had forgotten about because it had been so long since. And somewhere in that time, a young gravedigger named, well, at the time he wasn't young, he was an old gravedigger named Darwin, who sort of walked into my head, walking around a cemetery that looked very much like La Perouse Cemetery. And I wrote this short story that really just started with him walking through a place that the last place he would have expected to end up, the last place he would have expected to feel comfortable or safe or like he belonged. and doing his rounds to lock up at the end of the evening. And that's all I had. I just had him walking around this space. And then this woman kind of walked in and was like, hold on, I have something to say about that. And then she walked in, and then people just kept walking in the story. I thought it was finished. I thought, well, all right, I write the story, cool, done. And it wouldn't leave me alone. Yeah. You know, another character came, and I was like, okay, hold on. What exactly am I writing? So by the time I went to do my MA, that's when I said, okay, I have this short story that I feel is not actually a short story. And yeah, that's sort of how this book happened.
I think in Ireland we would call it a short story with notions.
Oh, definitely had notions.
Like notions.
Yeah. It had notions, it had ways, it had all of the things.
It's interesting that you said that Darwin just walked in and everybody else walked in right after him, because with both books, while the living are in a lot of ways haunted by the dead in themselves are also haunted by the living. And I was curious also just to develop on that point, like who were some of the characters that haunted you? I guess Darwin came first for you, Ayanna, and I guess probably maybe you could share, Jan, the characters that haunted you and probably still haunt you. I mean, I have those who haunt me after completing both books, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
You mean characters who
kind of linger,
yeah.
or who throughout the book their presence was always there?
So some of them are dead and some of them are not. Like for instance, there are some characters that I wonder, I could have given more real estate to you. Like they're still talking, they still have things that they want to say. The best thing about that is you could write another book and they could come back. They have more space. Yeah. Seema was one of the characters that I always say, Seema has a whole other life that she has to live outside of this small story. Not even small, but outside of the story that she has, this space that she has in the novel. And she just kept, hey. And so, yeah, Seema is one of those characters that haunted me. And she's not gone anywhere, I could say that, spoiler.
Good to know, because she's definitely one who also lingered for me as well. How about you, Jan?
I'm going to say something weird, but I think it's myself that kind of haunts me in this book. I don't really believe writers when they say that they pluck ideas from nowhere. I think you bring a little bit of yourself into every character that you write, because you're drawing on your own experience of love or your own experience of grief or fear. And so there's a lot of my worst traits in these characters and a lot of conflicted characters here. I really like writing conflicted men. I don't know what that says about me, but I definitely write better male characters. And there's a man in here called Alan Gardner who marries a Filipino woman just as a marriage of convenience. And he's a racist. He's really struggling to love his son. And I loved writing Alan Gardner because
Alan Gardner is not
there's
a bad
complexity.
man.
He's not a bad man.
Yeah, but he is a bad man as well. And there's part of me in that. There's also a character called Granda Pete who I love, who's Hannah's Granda. And I kind of wrote Granda Pete as the person I want to be. I think he's the only character of real faith, not religion, but faith in this book. And that's kind of, I would like to be Granda Pete when I grow up and get more mature. So I'm haunting myself in this book.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, I get that. And it seems like, I think it's almost as if we talked about this. You're just feeding it straight into the questions that I want to go into. So I'm so glad you brought up faith, because faith and belief that, in a way, transcending religion. Usually might describe herself as being non-religious, but of course the faith, the belief system she was rooted in is in African spirituality. We have Darwin, born Rasta. He's struggling with working with the dead and what that means for him and his relationship with not only his faith but his mother. And of course we have Hannah, her mother, the characters in the Raptures. They are also conflicted, seeing each child die, the fear, their faith and belief in the things that they were raised to believe in, that they held there, are being challenged page by page. And I guess, not to be philosophical or anything, but what is it about, you think, with this book, with death and dying, that kind of raises these questions. What did you, were some of your faith and beliefs challenged whilst writing these books?
I think I was a very godless child growing up, in that I didn't grow up with I didn't grow up in church. I didn't grow up with that sense of religion at all. I remember reading the Bible vividly, but I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was a book. So I was like, why does this book not have a story? It's like little stories, but I was quite confused. So it meant that, I suppose, if I had to think of what I had faith in, I had faith in my mother. I had faith in my grandmother. I had faith in their stories. I had faith in story. That was the thing that I think I believed in most strongly. And of course, I think about that in retrospect. Maybe when I was 8, I wasn't thinking about these things at all. I just wanted to go and play, you know. But I think that maybe I wrote this book because I needed that reassurance that my dad would not leave me. It's the first time I've said that out loud.
Do you want to take a wee minute?
Give me a moment.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
I'll go ahead. And then.
Yeah.
I think for me, there's a process that a lot of people go through, and it can be a religious process, or it can just be a process of growing into yourself, where at some point in your life you have to question what you've inherited and what you actually believe for yourself. For me, it was a religious experience of questioning the religion that had been passed on to me. For other people, it's about your identity. It might be about gender identity, national identity, political identity. But there's a movement towards kind of what I would call faith in that, or maybe humanity, maturity anyway. And it can be deeply, deeply unsettling. And there's a tendency to just, you know, the phrase, throw the baby out with the bathwater. So for me, Hannah's on a journey that a lot of people went through in Northern Ireland and other places where religion has been a very disruptive thing and a difficult thing of trying to pick through what do I want to hold on to, what's actually of worth, and what needs to go out. So for me, writing this book, the big texts that I turned to were Naomi Alderman's Disobedience, which is about kind of a woman picking through the remnants of her Jewish faith, and also Miriam Toa's Women Talking, which I just thought was masterful. There's a lot of grace in it. It's not throwing religion out altogether, but it's saying, what sensibly do we choose to carry on into the next phase of our existence? But I think there's a pass in your book as well. There's this movement towards maturity and to growing into yourself in a way.
Yeah, I think both characters have to figure out not just, well, I guess, their roles and their families. They have to figure out their roles. They've both inherited these very weighty sort of responsibilities. Yejide inherits through her maternal line the ability to shepherd the dead into the afterworld, the ability to settle the dead down, to keep them comfortable and keep them in their graves. And this is something that happens not just sort of in a kind of head space, but in a very bodily space. It is something that, you know, the woman and her family feel the dead all the time. And that is a huge kind of weighted inheritance that they sometimes would love to reject, that they would sometimes wish that, oh God, let somebody else do it. Why the dead can't see about the dead? Why they need us? Why can't we kind of move on with our lives and so on? And then there's Darwin, who is a man of deep faith and deep conviction and a very honor. I think it was important for me for Darwin to be a Rasta man. That was I think the key to Darwin was that he's a Rasta man, that he is of the world, in the world, but not of the world, that he didn't have the luxury of going up on a mountain and being a monk and being away and whatever. He had to figure out how to navigate a world that is corrupt, that is hateful, that is beautiful, that is all of those things, and still find a kind of balance of his honor at the same time. And that's why I think the relationship between two of them was so was such a joy to write.
Yeah, and it's this kind of sorting process of thinking what needs to be rejected and what needs
What
to be
do I
held
reject?
on.
What do I keep? And if I have to reject some things, even if I have to reject them, I'm still that man. I'm still that woman. Even though I let this go, I'm still a person of honor. I'm still a person of integrity. I'm still my mother's son. I'm still my mother's daughter. And just kind of working out what it means to sit in that space of not rejecting our inheritance, holding it, sometimes uncomfortably, but holding it.
Do you know, sorry, can I just...
Yeah, we can just chat it.
Do you not think that, I mean, it's the thing I think a lot about how long that process takes. Like, for me, it took 20-something years. And, you know, your book, there's a long passage of time as well. And yet, society now is just like, you need to change your mind and know what you think about all of these things straight away. There's no grace in the process.
Yeah, and I mean, and you're right. It's we're constantly becoming ourselves and constantly becoming some other version of who we are. And you're right. We, you know, I guess because we're so surveilled in that sense. It's like, what do you think? What, you know, it has to be the right thing, and that's not necessarily 100% a bad thing. I think it means that if we are being held a little bit more accountable, that ain't bad. You can feel uncomfortable for a little while, but that's all right. You get over it. You get over it. You feel a little uncomfortable, and then you say, I don't know yet. But you know, we figure it out.
We'll figure it out. And I think now will be a good time to open the floor to questions. Forgive me if I don't recognize faces, but we'll definitely like to have some of the audience input at this time. Who would like to open? Who would like to go first? Please don't leave us hanging.
Or we could just continue chatting,
because
we could also do that.
Going once, going twice, okay.
Thanks both for really, really nice, enjoyable readings and a great conversation so far. A question really for both of you. I'll start with Jan. You spoke a lot about wanting to see people who'd shared your experience and it not being a unique experience, but also difficult in some ways to write about because of your community and their background. So how has your writing gone down for the people that you partly envisaged as the audience? And how has it been received by your family, your community, those sort of things?
Always the first question asked.
Sorry.
My father passed away about 3 months before the book came out, and I was very worried about what he would make of it because he was Presbyterian clergy. And the last but one, I'll try not to cry at this as well. The last but one conversation I had with him, I tried to tell him, and he said, Jana, you need to stop worrying and just write the books you need to write. And I will be holding on to that for the rest of my life. My mother, not so much. So that's a different conversation. But what's been lovely is it's opened up amazing conversations with other women who grew up in similar circumstances. So we haven't really got into it, but a lot of it is the journey towards autonomy that women who grew up in these very closed religious communities are going on. And I've just come back from France where I had some of the most amazing conversations with young Muslim women who are trying to balance that respect for your parents' generation, but also that they're young women in the world now who are trying to reconcile their faith with what contemporary life is about. And I didn't envisage, as a lapsed Presbyterian, having the best chats with young Muslim women. It's such a joy to have that.
One of the things that I find is always very cool is that, we've been speaking about this quite a bit, is that you write this book, you spend however many years thinking about it, writing it, and at some point you just let it go. And you have no idea who it's going to touch, who it's going to reach, what it's going to do in the world, as though after you let it go, it has its own life. I'm always surprised when sometimes I go to a literary festival. And, I'm not from up there, I'm from here. So when you carry me to, you send me on a train to go to some small town that me never hear about. And you go there and you're like, all these people read this book? Some little old ladies, they come in and they have the book and they want it signed. And I think people ask me a lot, was writing it in Trinidadian vernacular English, our language, was it a barrier? It don't seem so at all. The book is doing its work in the world. Whatever you envisaged or didn't envisage, the book has its own plan, its own path, its own time that it's going to take to reach who it has to reach. And after a while, you just have to say, well, all right, live, go along, go ahead.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions?
All the questions.
All the questions.
Thank you very much. All right, so good afternoon. This question is for Ayanna. You spoke about the notion of being haunted by specific characters. But could you speak to this notion that the ancestors, are also kind of invested in your story? Kind of similar to what Lorna Goodison said at the beginning of her memoir. The fact that the ancestors seem to approve of this type of work.
God, I hope so. I hope so. I'm going to try to get through this song without crying again. I say first for the dead, then the unborn, last for the living. And it's a kind of a thing and it sounds so pretentious when I say it out loud. Because it's like, of course you're writing for yourself. You're the person writing the book. But it's a thing that I kind of have in my mind. Who is this? Not just for, as in I'm giving them something because they may ask me for nothing, but who is it oriented towards? Who is it for in a different way? And I know and I've known that I came into the world and we come into the world on the shoulders, in the arms, and in the thoughts of a long line of people who I wouldn't say we will never see, because of course we could see them, of course we could talk to them, of course they intercede on our behalf all the time. My life in the last 5 years is due to intercession. I believe that in a very, very deep-rooted, serious way. There's no other way I could explain it. There's no other way I could explain, there's no other way I could explain it. And I feel as though if I continue thinking about it that way, I'm not going to step wrong. I might step uncomfortably, I might be able to do something better, but I'm not going to step wrong. Yeah.
When you see that warning signal, you're like, okay, we have to wrap this up. But I do want to ask you both one. Oh, we have one more question. Okay, great.
Oh, thank you. I've been shy to ask this question, but it's a burning question that I wanted to ask for the longest while. Well, I do write short stories, but I'm more biased towards poetry. But, and sometimes when you write like a month after or months after, you go back and you read what you wrote and then you're like, this might have sung better this way. Oh no, I think I don't like this line. I'm just wondering, now, have you look at your work again, have you thought about it, and is there anything that you would have liked to change looking at your work now? It's a thing that writers go through, So I just wondered about that. So if anyone you can answer.
Yes.
Easy answer.
If you ever get a chance, stand behind a writer when they're reading from their book at the podium and you will see them self-editing as they write. Because whenever you've read something aloud 400 or 500 times in front of people, you're like, oh shit, why did I put the comma in there? So I think it just speaks to the fact that a piece of art is a live thing. I'm a big Bob Dylan fan, and every time Dylan plays some of his songs, you get a different version. And there's no fixed kind of, canonized version of things. So I love that. I love that Ayanna talked about, you release your art into the world and it's a thing on its own. It's like releasing a child into the world. It's going to say things that utterly embarrass you. and it's going to also make you really proud, and you just exist in the wee bit in the middle trying to get out of the way, because that's what an artist's job is, it's to get out of the way of the art.
I like that, get out of the way of it. Yes, obviously, of course, there are things I go back and I say, oh, I could have written that line better, or even if I think of the characters, you know, have I done right by this person? Have I not just did I write them well as a craft exercise, but have I done right by them? That's something that sometimes you go back and you think, but then you have to give yourself grace too. It ain't one book you're gonna write in the world, hopefully. You know, you do the first one, and the next one you do it better, or you do it different, or so. So I think, you know, you give yourself grace to let it go.
We agreed last night the only person who never makes mistakes is Toni Morrison.
Yeah, she has not done that. That's the only person.
Yeah.
I agree as well.
The only person.
Okay, we have one more question.
Hi. Kind of a technical question following up from that one. Out of curiosity, how long did each of your books take to write from that first short story to now? And what made you keep writing it? Like, how do you keep at it? Thinking it's like a long period of time. Okay.
That's a good question.
Yeah. 3 months on the short stories, 3 months on the novel, 2 years in the edit. I am not a very good first drafter, and I thankfully have a very patient editor, so I think this went through about 15 redrafts to get it there. And what keeps me going is I need to make money.
Yeah.
And also that when you get about 40,000 words into a novel, the next one starts knocking at the door, going, hurry up and get out of the way so you can start onto this. So I don't know if you're the same, but the next thing always keeps me motivated as well.
I find it difficult to say when I started writing it, because the more I answer that question, the more I realize, oh, actually, hold on, I've been thinking about it here, or this short story actually was the first real germ of it. So, you know, the honest answer could be 9 years, or it could be 3 years, it could be... So, I mean, I remember when I sat down and I started writing the short story, that was probably a few months of writing it, tinkering with it. So 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. I'm a very slow writer. So I wish I could, in my mind, I want to be the kind of writer who can power through a very messy draft and not be too precious about which word and whatever. But God, I'm such a pain. I really am just word by word, sentence by sentence. And I almost feel like I can't, like I hiccup if I try to go forward and it doesn't feel like it's okay. It's a stupid process, but it's mine. I don't know. Maybe I'll find a better one with the next book. I'd probably write a lot faster if I could power through the messy draft and then go back and do it. And what keeps me going? Yeah, I think that, listen, what we're gonna be doing, selling insurance, is the best job in the world, you know? Because I love it. I love writing. I love stories, you know. I don't want to go and work in a bank. I can't count, so, you know, this is the only thing I think I'm sincerely good at. So that's the reason.
Okay, well, I would like to give both of you the opportunity to read from your books to close our conversation. But before we do that, just to mention, both authors have workshops. I believe yours is tomorrow at 10 at the first floor. I don't know if there's still room in the workshops, to be honest, but you could try. We've all tried to storm Aboka's workshop. And Jan's workshop will be on Sunday also from 10 a.m., first floor at the National Library. So I think it's only right that both authors give us one final reading from their novels. Jan is already flipping through, so I think she's got to go first, bearing in mind we have like about 4 minutes.
Right, I will read first.
Thank you.
This one is just to give you a bit of a context of what life was like back then in '93. Ross had only just turned 11. He was still a child, though the thought of girls was already pressing. He'd sometimes go through the K's catalogue for pictures of women in bras and pants. He'd yet to touch a girl himself, had yet to taste coffee or travel anywhere in an aeroplane. He'd been looking forward to going to Lanzarote. It would have been his first time in a foreign place. Poor Ross, it's never easy going first. There's been no talk of the boys passing yet. It'll be mid-morning before the news spreads. In the houses and farms of Ballylack, people are getting on with their everyday doing. They're feeding the cows and drinking tea, watching the telly and heading to bed. There's no expectation that tomorrow will be much different from today. 93 has been an unremarkable year, and the summer's shaping up to be equally forgettable. It's neither hot nor particularly damp. It isn't a World Cup year or one for the Olympics. Major's in Downing Street, Clinton's in the White House. Folks aren't sure what to make of him. Keep an eye on that one. He's got notions, they like to say. There's talk of Clinton wading into the troubles. Word is, he thinks he can sort it out. Let the same fella have a run at it. Better than him have tried and failed. Down south, Ireland win the Eurovision for the umpteenth year in a row. In Your Eyes is the song in question. You'd have a hard time dancing to it, though it's got a catchy hook. Makes a change from the usual earnest shout, plonk, 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 and words about peace. What are the young ones really listening to? Shaggy, Ace of Base, Too Unlimited, feel-good Euro hits. They don't sound half so feel-good pumping through the tinny speakers of the GAA clubs and community centres where Ulster's youth hang out. Dancing, smoking, drinking cheap vodka decanted into Fanta bottles. No limits will reach for the sky, the youngsters sing, fists pumping furiously to the beat, black bomber jackets soaking up their sweat. They go buck mad every time No Limits comes on. Sure, it's only a tune to them, not the call to arms it could be. No limits indeed, what a load of bollocks. These kids hail from Aucher, Clocher and Cullibaggy. Say it out loud. Cullibaggy, you can practically hear the fences. They couldn't be more limited if they tried. Elsewhere in the province, they're still at it, killing each other with bombs and guns. It's the 23rd or 4th summer of this nonsense. Depends on when you start at keeping count. Most folks are fed up with the whole thing. They're adamant the killing must stop. There's war in Bosnia and Afghanistan. There's a brutal one winding up in Rwanda. You can't turn on your telly for seeing dead bodies piled everywhere. Blood pooling in the gutters, women howling and getting on. The people here are sick of death. This isn't a third world country. This is Britain. Or this is Ireland. Or both. Or neither. Or its own institution, peculiar as a maiden aunt. Either way, it's a civilised country. It's been a whole 2 years since McDonald's arrived.
This is a bit from Darwin, the first man who walked into my head in this book. Some days Darwin can't work out how long he in the city. The calendar say nearly 2 months, but Fidelists have a different kind of time. The hours longer, the days deeper, and digging graves and lowering coffins in the ground is like watching whole lives fast forward beginning to end. Fidelists make him adopt its rhythm instead of his own. And it's not just Fidelis. Port Angeles crackle and spit like oil on a fireside, and he starts to like how he could disappear into it. Just another one of the many somebodies that come here for wherever it is they come for. He learning that even death in Fidelis does work in sync with the city. Payday? That mean hospital, courthouse, and graveyard. Heavy rain? That mean road accident for so, and they're too busy to even laugh and old talk. Then it have other times when something starts to ripple through the city. The wrong man get killed, the blocks get hot, and it's only sirens blaring out through the night. Them times they dig in grave 3-4 a day and have to send for temporary workers so they could do more than one funeral same time. But now as it get closer to November, around All Souls Day, it's like the dead and the living come to a kind of a truce. All the graves quiet, and sometimes he don't see the other grave diggers at all for a couple days. You know they just work other jobs and get little contracts when things light in Fidelis, but nobody let Darwin in on the cut. True, He could use the money, but he don't mind. The days when it was just him, even the weight of the keys in his pocket make him feel good. And when the street lamps come on, the outer edges of Fidelis gild in borrowed light, he stand at the crossroads, right in the center of the cemetery in near darkness, and feel his whole body relax, like how a man must feel when he finally reach in his own home after a long day and smell food cooking. Not like he ever know that feeling, but he figured it must feel a little bit like this, like Fidelis at twilight. Maybe everything does just get easier the longer you do it. True, some nights he still dream the heavy scissors in his hand, his head getting lighter with each cut, his locks spreading out among the zabaka leaves in the dirt yard. But each time he shave his head over the sink, he get more used to his reflection in the mirror. He makes sure to gather every last strand and put them in a small clay bowl, say a prayer, light a match, and set it on fire. The bitter scent of burning hair somehow make him feel restful and safe. He was a man without law, without vow, but he was still his mother's son.
We'd definitely like to thank you all for joining us for this Take Two event. This was really a profound and enlightening conversation. So once again, thank you both to Ayanna and Jan for really guiding us through an excellent conversation. Please note that books are available for sale in the library atrium, both books I believe. So please, and the authors will be available for book signing out there somewhere. Thank you again for being a wonderful audience. And enjoy the rest of the program.